Well, again, a bit like qualifying, difficult to know where to start with Max Verstappen today, and Red Bull, and Adrian Newey, the man behind Red Bull, and what we saw today at Spa, that dazzling display of pace, not only on the straights, but also on the medium speed and slow corners, traction, braking, turn-in, everywhere. They were the absolute class of the field, the Red Bulls. And Max Verstappen made perfect use of it from what turned out eventually to be P13 on the grid. Bearing in mind he was supposed to start from the back of the grid, that reflects the number of other penalties that were allotted to other drivers, and with Pierre Gasly also starting from the pit lane as per his teammate Yuki Tsunoda in the other AlphaTauri, it meant that Max was P13. So let's put the race in some sort of context. Bear in mind it's quite a long lap at Spa, that's the first thing. Secondly, the safety car came out because of that incident about which I spoke, and also because Valtteri Bottas and Nicholas Latifi had a drama at the top of the hill as well. So to get all that cleared up, they put out the safety car. And so there was no racing then. And they didn't restart until lap 5 long laps of Spa. And by lap 9, Max was up to third. They were all clean passes. Top of the hill, end of the straight, into the chicane. Just incredibly quick everywhere. Quick and clean everywhere. He was up to third. And Charles Leclerc had sat next to him on the grid in the Ferrari. You could say his nearest rival, if you like, was struggling. He had to go in for a new set of tyres after 3 laps. Again, some sort of first corner drama, punctured tyre, went in for a set of mediums, and different race thereafter, of course. So it was Max Verstappen, absolutely the toast of Spa. And it wasn't long before, of course, going a second lap quicker than the opposition as he was, sometimes more, he took the lead. It wasn't going to be quite the same versus Carlos Sainz. It took 2 stops before they were on parity. And when they were on parity, he just blasted past Sainz and disappeared into the distance, more than a second a lap, and won as he chose. The only slight drama was when Max was losing time behind Sergio Perez, who couldn't get past Carlos Sainz in the relatively early stages of the race. But after that, it was just Max Verstappen on his own. He set fastest lap 34, and a new set of mediums, 49.3. Pretty good lap, you've got to say. Everybody else is in the 50s and 51s at that stage. Right at the end of the race, Ferrari brought Charles Leclerc in for a new set of softs, empty fuel, new set of soft tyres, and the fastest Charles could do, even with a bit of a tow from Fernando Alonso's Alpine, was a 49.9. And I don't know whether to say it now or at the end of the race, but Ferrari's strategy, if you like, struck again, because in doing so, Charles exceeded the speed limit in the pit lane and was given a 5-second penalty, as a result of which he lost the place he just got from Fernando Alonso. Anyway, more of that in a minute. Let's not detract in any way from Max Verstappen's achievement today. It was, I mean, there are lots of stats coming out. The one I like the most is that it's the first time since 1959/60 since a driver has started 2 consecutive races from P10 or lower and won both of them. And the last driver to do that, incredibly, was Bruce McLaren, who won the last round of the 59 World Championship in Sebring, a Cooper driver at that point. Jack Brabham had clinched the championship, but Bruce won the race. And then he won the 1960 Argentine Grand Prix in a Cooper as well. Having said all that, let's just take a snapshot of where the Red Bulls were so quick today, specifically Max Verstappen. The snapshot, let's take lap 38 towards the end of the race. And there's no reason for Max to be pushing at any point now. Carlos Sainz on the Kimmel Straight, we're talking, I picked a lap where nobody got the benefit of a tow or obviously DRS. So Carlos Sainz, who's running third, but under a lot of pressure now from George Russell, 310 kilometers on the Kimmel Straight. On the same lap, cruising, probably turning the engine right down, Max Verstappen 321, Sergio Perez 321. So that was the Red Bull top speed compared with the Ferrari, 11 kilometers an hour quicker when they weren't even trying. In the middle sector, which is basically high speed, medium speed corners, Max doing about the same as the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz and George in the Mercedes. But bear in mind, Carlos and George are both racing as hard as they can within the limitations of tyre deg, and Max is just cruising at this point, doing exactly the same speed through there. No loss of speed, even though obviously he's much quicker in a straight line. And by comparison, Sergio Perez is also backing off now because he's got second place easily in hand, 186. So that just shows that Max, when Max is backing off, he's still 4 kilometers an hour quicker than his teammate Sergio Perez in the middle sector. And then finally in the last sector, where the Red Bull was really good and really good under brakes on full tanks in the early laps of the race. Max passed about 7 cars there, consecutive laps. Just so impressive. Again, Red Bull 2:12, both of them, and Carlos Sainz 2:10 with the tyres going away. Charles Leclerc 2:10. And George Russell, interestingly, 2:13 in Sector 3. He was pretty good through Sector 3. And just to clarify that in terms of tyres, Max at that point was on medium tyres, 8-lap-old. Charles Leclerc was also on mediums, and the others were on hard tyres. So, yeah, really, really quick in a straight line, as we've been saying all weekend. But normally at Spa, when a car does have great top speed, it hurts them in Sector 2. There's always that compromise to be made. In the case of the Red Bull, and this is why they dominated this Grand Prix, there was no compromise to be made. They were just brilliant through the air and brilliant through the medium and high speed corners. And then, I've got to say, traction, turn in, slow corners, just as good as well. So Adrian Newey, not sure if you're at Spa, you should stand up and take a bow, because this race was the first when the FIA scrutineers were truly policing the new technical directive around vertical oscillation. So Red Bull obviously got that sorted. They lost nothing. It looked as if they gained something with, as I said yesterday, with normal progressive upgrades on the car you'd expect at this time of the year, whereas everybody else, Ferrari seemed to have lost a lot of top speed relative to Red Bull, and everybody else going backwards. Mercedes, in the hands of George Russell, looked pretty good, almost as good as the Ferrari in the closing laps of Spa. So in that sense, you could possibly say Mercedes made a bit of ground, but it was a hard slog. And it was also Carlos Sainz that George was racing against, and Charles Leclerc had a fractious race from the start, as I say, with an early stop for tyres. So what of Lewis Hamilton? I've been saying 2 things about Lewis all year. One is I'm amazed at his motivation and his demeanour given everything that happened over the winter, not only Abu Dhabi, but also losing Valtteri Bottas, replaced by George Russell, and a few other things going on as well. And then a car out of the box that was patently uncompetitive in terms of the race win, and how he's kept his demeanour so positive. And then beyond that, the job he's done racing from the midfield in a crowded first lap, not something he's been particularly used to doing over the last 10 years or so in Formula One. Yes, there have been occasions, but generally speaking, Lewis has usually been able to qualify near the front, away from the skirmish on the first laps. And I've been saying how well he's been doing that. Well, it all went wrong at Spa. Not sure why. Maybe it was because it was the first day back at school. He was more motivated than ever because Max and Charles and a lot of others were at the back of the grid. And Lewis found himself starting P4, a great thing for him, of course. And when Sergio Perez made a slow start, Fernando Alonso dodged round, got up to P2. Lewis was right behind him and tucked in behind the Alpine as they went down the Kimmel Straight on the opening lap. And I suppose you just got to put it down to sheer adrenaline, but Fernando's on the inside, does a really good job, brakes really late, stays on the inside going into the first part of Le Combe, the right-hander, and Lewis is on the outside and just basically drives into him and touches him, goes up in the air. At first he thought it was a puncture, but then later on it was clear, a few seconds later it was clear that some sort of, I guess it was a water line, something like that had been damaged because the car went up in the air and landed. And Lewis was a very sad figure, I think. They showed a shot of him just walking away back from the rear, just walking head down, helmet on. And you had to wonder at this point, what is going through the mind of the 7 times world champion, whether all the things I've been saying, all the things that happened over the winter from Abu Dhabi onwards are now will now start to get into his psyche and will make him think, do I really need all this? Whether it was his fault or not, kind of immaterial given the enormity of the situation. Having said that, this is the first part of a triple header, and perhaps the best thing about that incident is that we're going straight to Zandvoort, and in theory it'll be wiped off the slate and it'll be all bets are on or off, whatever it is, as they go to Zandvoort. And the Mercedes should be pretty good around Zandvoort. If it was being hurt like the Ferrari by the long straight in Spa and how good and how aerodynamically efficient the Red Bull was at Spa, then in theory, the Mercedes and the Ferrari should be a little bit nearer the Red Bull at Zandvoort, because there are fewer places at Zandvoort for that aerodynamic efficiency to show off. Well, of course, what it will mean is that probably for the same amount or the least amount of oscillation, the Red Bull will still develop more downforce than the Ferrari and the Mercedes. And that'll be the telling factor, of course. It'll be a telling factor in terms of grip on turn-in, traction, and then also tyre management in the race, particularly on full tanks. So anyway, getting back to Lewis, that was unusual to see that. You know, we've had a few first lap incidents with Lewis, notably, of course, with Nico Rosberg in Barcelona, but it was a sad thing to see, really. And on this occasion, I'd have to say Fernando was completely blameless. He got on the radio, as he would, saying, you know, this guy doesn't know how to drive other than from the front of the race, all the rest of it. It was a bit unnecessary to say all that, I think. You know, Fernando's been around long enough to be a little bit more mature than that. But having said that, Lewis for sure had, as did Max Verstappen with the Aston Martins, had the option to back away and let Fernando go. And he probably would have got him, easy to say, he probably would have got him within a lap or two anyway. Because as it turned out, the Alpines weren't that quick on the straight. They were okay. Just going back to those comparisons that we were doing, Esteban Ocon and Fernando were doing basically Mercedes, McLaren times in a straight line. They weren't sort of 20 kilometers an hour quicker than anybody else. Although there was a funny moment quite late in the race when Esteban Ocon seemed to have two toes and he was in DRS and did 335 kilometers an hour. That was quite good. Lando got to 335 as well in a toe. So they're pretty quick at the end of the straight there, aren't they? The whole, just on that subject, you know, it's always a spooky part of Spa, but the organisers should be congratulated, I think, for the way they've tidied up the circuit, given a bit more runoff area where you need it. And the circuit looked pretty good. And as a result, possibly as a result of that, but also no doubt more money changing hands, we can confirm, or Formula One confirmed at the start of the of Sunday, that the Belgian Grand Prix will be on the 2023 Formula One calendar. So that's good news for everyone, I think. Let's talk about Ferrari now. Ferrari chose to start Carlos on a used set of softs. Everybody else around him was on medium, stacked up behind him. And I can only think that was because they just wanted him to get away from Perez. They knew that Sergio had this top speed advantage in the Red Bull, and the only card they could play would be maybe to get him off the line super quick and see if he could get away in the first couple of laps and get away from the DRS. And that was, I guess, you know, it's aggressive. It's kind of admitting defeat before you go into the race, because it's assuming that Red Bull are going to be that quick in a straight line. And they were, of course, and Sergio would have won it either way had Max Verstappen not been there. But it was an interesting call. Then later in the race, there was a moment when both Ferraris came in. Charles Leclerc had this weird drive up kind of from the back of the grid as well, but as I say, interrupted very early on by that unscheduled stop to go from softs to mediums. But he came in the same lap, a stacked pit stop. It wasn't stacked, but it was the same lap as Carlos Sainz. And they put Carlos, this was on lap 25, so it's just after half distance. And they put Carlos on hard tyres, obviously wanting him to go to the end of the race on the hard tyre, and Charles on the medium. And at this point, I think quite a lot of Ferrari observers said, well, Ferrari's strategy strikes again. What is it? Can they not make up their mind? What is the right tyre for their drivers to be on at this stage of the race? In fairness to Ferrari, I suspect at that point, maybe I'm giving them too much credit here, but I suspect at that point they were thinking Charles is going to be whatever he's going to be, 5th, 4th, 6th, whatever. But we need to try and get fastest lap at least, get a point. And so we're not going to run him to the finish. So we might as well run the risk of putting him on the medium and then the soft at the end. And we'll run Carlos to the finish on the hard. There's another question here, which is why Carlos Sainz's use of the hard tyre resulted in so much deg compared with George Russell's use of the hard tyre on the Mercedes. Carlos's tyres, when they were together, and they were together the last third of the race, separated by no more than 2 or 3 seconds. And when they were together, Carlos's tyres were about 3 laps older, so it shouldn't have made that much difference. And Carlos was saying after the race, you know, we got to understand why the tyres were so hot and why we were degrading them so much. But I think the answer, and this is a presumptive answer, I've got to say, does underline the thought that Ferrari have had to make more adjustments to their car to get within the new technical directive than Red Bull have had to do. And I say that because, in theory, they've probably gone to a slightly higher ride height. They've probably had to stiffen everything up a little bit. They've probably got less downforce. And as a result, inevitably, the car is moving around on its tyres more, it's requiring more energy from its tyres, and that requires more heat, of course, and generates more heat. So that, I think that moment alone, when Carlos admitted that there'd been a lot of problems with deg and tyre temperature, that I think that underlined how much, the amount of work Ferrari have had to do to get their car to be compliant. Whereas, of course, it was no issue at all for Red Bull, for either Max Verstappen or Sergio Perez. Very good drive by George Russell to finish P4, very close to the Ferrari on a circuit where you would have said at the start of the year they were going to get blown into the weeds by the Ferrari. So in that sense, a positive day for Mercedes to be that near Ferrari, but to be that far away from Red Bull, though, is depressing for sure, for everybody, not only for Mercedes, but for everybody, particularly Ferrari, of course. So on a day when Lewis Hamilton was really quick around that first half lap, but didn't get any further, George Russell brought the car home, had to look after the tyres, had to look after the temperatures, but drove his usual forceful, very consistent race, very, very few errors to finish a very good fourth. So Charles Leclerc would have been fifth had he not exceeded the speed limit in the pit lane, and he's rushed to get back into the race ahead of Fernando Alonso with that set of new soft tyres right at the end of the race. And so he eventually finished sixth. And Esteban Ocon was a very good seventh. He was in position to race Fernando hard, probably to overtake Fernando. He was on medium tyres when Fernando was on hards towards the end of the race, but was given a directive by the team to hold position. Not quite sure why that would have been given, bearing in mind Fernando's leaving the team and going to Aston Martin at the end of the year. And I don't think Esteban was that happy about it, but he did what he was told, and overall a great result for Alpine. As I've been saying all weekend, Alpine looking really good as a race team, with a good car, very good organisation, and carrying on in a very even keel sort of way, despite all the dramas going on with the Oscar Piastri situation. Speaking of which, very good to see young Jack Doohan, Mick Doohan's son, win the F2 feature race today with Virtuosi Racing. Very good win against Felipe Drugovich. Won it in the pit stop really, but a lot of pressure at the end and still held on to cross the line in front. But of course he is also an Alpine driver, so if you put all that into play as well, you've got Mark Webber, the Aussie grit, managing Oscar Piastri, the Australian superstar, who doesn't want to drive for Alpine and wants to drive for McLaren. And then you've got another Australian, Jack Doohan, knocking on the door of Alpine saying, I just won the feature race here at Spa. Interesting to see some senior heavy top brass also clapping and cheering Jack on the podium after that F2 race as well. So yeah, all in all, a very good day, you've got to say, for Alpine. Let's have a look at some of the other results. Sebastian Vettel, good job. There was a moment early on where he just appeared to drive his teammate, team leader perhaps, the son of the owner, off the track at the top of the hill, and Lance just backed away and let him go. And in the end, Sebastian finished 8th, which was a good result, bearing in mind he didn't get out of Q1 yesterday in his normal fashion, but he was racy and very fast and very good in the early laps of the race, and consolidated that throughout. Pierre Gasly was 9th. Good performance from the pit lane in the AlphaTauri. Lots of different strategies throughout the race in the midfield here to try and out-strategize one another, but a good result there for AlphaTauri, I thought. Franz Tost and the boys and girls at AlphaTauri. And Alex Albon brought the Williams home in 10th place, got a point. Really good. I mean, he started, P6 in the end with all the other stuff going on, and really good job. Bear in mind, Daniel Ricciardo in the McLaren was P7 on the grid. I mean, he should have beaten Alex Albon in the Williams. And Daniel Ricciardo, despite the best efforts of his engineer to say, you're doing really well, Daniel, really up to speed, going well, bear in mind, strategy's coming into play, go for it. Finished 15th, beaten by Guan Yu Zhou and Yuki Tsunoda. And actually, when Sergio Perez crossed the line to finish second, not quite as much adulation for Sergio as there was for Max, as you can imagine. I was thinking, that could have been and would have been Daniel in that car. And I suppose at that point he would have got out and said, got beaten by politics again, don't like finishing second to Max Verstappen. But even if he did have to do that quite a lot and would have had to have done that quite a lot, surely that is better than finishing P15 behind Guan Yu Zhou and Yuki Tsunoda, Daniel. Anyway, with his career now in tatters, Daniel didn't look good in the race. He just seemed to be passed by everybody very early on as well. And the other McLaren, Lando Norris, equally didn't look at all good on the hard tyre. Lost a lot of ground, couldn't get past anyone. Disappointing day for McLaren overall. Lando finished 12th and Daniel 15th. And you would have thought McLaren around Spa, and they were looking pretty good, you would have thought they would have been better than that. Turns out yesterday, when I said that I didn't know what happened to Lando in the second run of Q3, turns out that, yeah, they did have that new set of tyres, that new set of soft tyres, but they didn't run him because they thought, oh, well, you know, he's got this penalty anyway, so we won't try and do anything. But I don't know. You know, maybe if it started a little bit higher, maybe it would have been a different day for him. But disappointing for him. Lance Stroll was 11th, just ahead of Lando, and Yuki Tsunoda 13th in the other AlphaTauri. So, yeah, I mean, this was... I thought yesterday, you know, Max is so quick that he could win this race. But then you thought, nah, there's so much he's got to do. He's got to get through the first hairpin. He's got to get through the first lap. There's bound to be some sort of shunt at the top of the hill. By that time, Sergio's going to be ahead on pit stops, or Carlos Sainz is going to be leading the race, having got away from the DRS. You know, second or third, maybe Sergio will give him the position. But I thought, yeah, you know, we all thought, well, maybe he can win it. But a lot of things had to go his way. But in reality, a lot of things didn't go his way. He created the race that he drove, and he found the slots. He used the car impeccably well, and he won the race from his point of view at the slowest possible speed, looking after the engine, looking after the tyres, doing all the things he's supposed to do. It was an absolute case study. It was indeed a win for the ages.